All right, so starting the recording. We'll do a little refresher of last week and then get into the topics for today. And let me bring up the syllabus for this week. So here we are, week 4, if statements. So this is when it actually starts to get fun, in my opinion. We'll be getting really into some true coding, and there's a lot you can do with if statements. So this will be a fast day. We'll try to cover a lot of material. But I would say if statements and loops, these are really the hugely important pieces of VBA, and to create a macro that's pretty powerful, you're almost always going to be using at least one, probably both, if statements and loops. So we got some good stuff to cover, and we will get into this. We'll just kind of go over the basic syntax of how to use a if then else statement. It's pretty similar to the logic that you would use with an if formula in Excel cell, but applied to VBA code. And the example we'll start off with is building our own calculator. So this is kind of a fun project, a good thing to do when you're learning a new language, just to do pretty basic math. So really just creating a calculator that does addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So we can create that really with just a few if statements and input boxes. And to that point, we didn't really cover input boxes last week, so I'll do a very brief explanation of how those work. At the beginning of the class, they're pretty similar to a message box, but they allow you to provide an input into there's a place to enter text. So that's how input boxes are going to come into play, and we'll need them for our calculator app. But to start it off, just for the first few minutes, we'll do a little refresher of last week. So we'll look into some of the variables that we used and also the message boxes. I'll ask you guys a few questions as we go through those, just to make it a little more interactive. So again, I'm going to open up a blank Excel file. Hopefully you guys can do the same. And actually, it may be useful for you all to use the file we were working on last week, and I may do the same because it would be, I think we'll use some of that data that we used at some point. We'll come back to that data table, so it'll be good to have this college rankings available. So I'll work in my week 3 demo, and I can send it out later as week 3 and 4 to you guys. Jordan, do you have this this data that we have here? I forget if I sent this to you or just Nan and Annabelle.
I was playing, but not by the end of the session, so at home. I'm not sure if I have all of it.
Okay, I will send you right now. Oh, I will send you that file right now into the link message. Let me know if you can receive that on your end.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that is some of the code from last week as well, which can be a useful refresher if you want to see some of the pieces that you missed. But we'll come back to this data in just a second. All right, so let me go into, I'll open up a new sheet, and I'll go into the developer tab and open up, create a new module. And you guys can do the same. We can call this week 4. So just as a little refresher, who wants to tell me how you go about naming a variable? So I can, I'll get you started. So dim, and then feel free just to shout out what the kind of syntax for creating a variable is.
can do the var name as a var type, the college name as a
Okay, yeah, so perfect.
okay.
That's the general format. And then let's hear. So what are a few of the things we can create a variable as? There's
There's a string, well, var type, you can do string, you can do
Mm-hmm.
integer, you can do long, you can do double.
You can do a
Couple.
lot of.
nice. Yeah, good memory. Let's see.
Not memory, I'm just looking at it.
Oh, you cheated.
I won't remember all those long.
Right. Okay, well, the good thing is that VBA, when you begin to type something in, it'll give you a drop down
Yeah.
here and there, so you actually don't need to memorize everything. You can know what variables are options for you based on what's there. So that's a good little starter with the variables, and then we can recall that you actually can use a variable by setting it equal to anything you want. We can set it equal to the value within a range. So we can set variable for equal to range A1. There's nothing in A1 right now, but that's just an example how to use it. And then message boxes, we didn't really get into too much detail with them, I don't think, but the general syntax is MSGBOX message box, and then you can enter within quotes anything you want.
Can I ask you a question? So
Sure.
the message, okay, so remember when we did FPR data integrity part, can I add that one, the message box at the end to say, okay, this is done?
Yeah, definitely. I think in a lot of the macros that I've built out, once all the steps have completed running, you can just write anything to let the user know that their macro has completed.
Has complete. Okay.
So you can write anything like that.
Okay.
So, okay, I think this was the majority of what we covered last week. I want to kind of skip through it very briefly because I want to make sure we have enough time for the material for today. Before we get into it, I will quickly show how to do an input box, which we didn't cover. So let's say we have a variable called var name. We can set it equal to input box, and then within the input box, and you'll see how this makes sense in a second when I run the macro, but let's say that our prompt is enter your variable name, and then we can have the output be a message box. So now when I run this, and I'll just step through it. So here, this is the input box. The first time we're seeing this, we get our prompt here. You can add in a few more things, like you can change it from saying Microsoft Excel to any custom name that you want. So a bit of customization can be done here. We'll maybe get into this later in the class, but I'm not sure if any of you have heard of user forms, but that lets you really be able to customize and do much more than an input box can do. But you can like add in drop-down lists, etc. But for the time being, we'll just focus here. So for your input box, we can call our variable name my variable. I hit OK, and then it's going to give us a message box with the variable name. And you can see that it just takes the variable name we have here, which we've just created, and it puts it in the message box. So that's about as much detail as I think we need to get into for input boxes before we start using them. Are there any questions about how to build one or what it's used for? Nope. All right. And at some point later on, we can maybe get into, if we recall, when we hit this message box, there's OK and cancel buttons, so you can customize this slightly. I think there's a few options of different buttons you can use, but you see if we press cancel, it still runs the macro. So then there's some other steps we can take to make the macro do something else when we press cancel, because we probably don't want it showing a message box or continuing to run the next steps. But that's our little input box demo. So now let's get into some if statements. So I'll create another macro and call it if statements. So is anyone familiar with these? I mean, you probably would recognize the general logic of it from other programs you've used or from even Excel formulas, but does anyone know anything about these before we start?
Yeah, well, yeah, if it's this, then that.
Hey, I mean, that's pretty much it, and at the heart of it, even complicated if statements just really boil down to if this, then do that.
Yeah.
And you'll see that. So I'll write it out with like a commented out, because this won't actually be a real one, but actually maybe I don't need to comment it out. If, and then, actually, you know what, I will comment it out just so you can kind of see the logic. So you can do if condition is true, then, and then within the if statement, you can have it do something, and then you have to end your if statement. So at the heart of it, this is really all an if statement is. So the key things you have to remember, you need to start it off with an if, then do a condition which can be validated as either true or false. Then you need to have a then, and then you can write any amount of code. So we can have a bunch of lines of code within here, do something else, and you can have the macro do as much code as you want within the if, and then you have to end your if statement. So that's kind of the general outline of what an if statement looks like. So now let's do a real one. We'll give ourselves a value in cell A1, say 10. And our if statement will be if range A1 value is greater than 5, then, and we can put in here, we'll just return a message box, and it'll be something simple. And so you can see that when I type this, I don't know if you can see my screen, but there's some blue text and some black text. So the blue is kind of the structure of the if statement. So the if, then, and end if, that's the blue shaded text. And then the rest is black, and that's kind of like the condition that we want to have met, and then the code we do inside is black. But just helpful to organize your if statements and know what's going on. So let's see. If I run this, your value is greater than 5. That's good. So, any questions about this?
No.
No. Okay. It's good. Uh, so then the next piece that you might want with an if statement is to add in an else. And this is pretty much the same basic logic as you have with an if statement in Excel, and maybe I can even write it out just so we are looking at it in the same way. So if, and then you have the logical test is greater than 10, then you can say greater than 10. And then your else, so that's the value if it is a false. We will say that it's less than 10. Oh, what did I do wrong here? Oh, I just picked a different cutoff point. So we'll stick with our greater than or equal to 5 example. So that's the Excel formula version. And then if I wanted to translate this into a VBA type of syntax, now I need to also add in an else. So here's my else, and then I can duplicate the message box. Your value is less than 5. And if I run this again, it's still going to be greater than 5, but let's say I change our value in A1 to 2. Well, we see our formula changes automatically, and then when I run the macro now, our value is less than 5. So this is a pretty basic example right now, but we're using the if, then, else. We can go even one step further by, instead of just looking at like a binary example where we're looking at a true and a false, we can add in an else if, which essentially functions as a nested if you still want to think about it in Excel terms. I'm trying to think. I want to make sure I'm explaining that right. It's not like you could have an if statement within an if statement, but a else if just lets you have kind of I guess more of a sub if statement. So it lets the if statement will cycle through until it finds a true condition, and then once you hit that condition, it'll break out of the if statement. So let's say I want to do something that now, instead of only telling us if it's greater than or less than 5, I want to know if it's less than 5, between 5 and 10, or greater than 10. So now I can add in one more. So that'll be our else if right here. And an else if, see, I gotta double check the syntax for this. I think it's just else if, but then we need a condition to be met for it. So we can have our first if statement look to see if it's less than 5. Your value is less than 5 if the range, the value in A1 is greater than 5 and less than 10, then we'll respond with a message box accordingly. Let me make this a little bigger. So you can see that for an else if, you need a then, because you have one of these conditions. So if the range A1 is greater than 5 and less than 10, then, and this is actually getting into one of my other points, with an AND. So you can use an AND within like the condition portion of an if statement. So you can have an AND or an OR, which lets you provide multiple conditions, and in this case they all have to be met in order to proceed into the if statement and do the code within it. So let's see, if it's greater than 5 and less than 10, and then lastly, we can say your value is greater than 10. So is this clear to everyone? This syntax, I know I'm kind of ramping it up quickly, but do you guys see what this is doing here? All right, I'll take that as a yes, I guess, but please do hop in and ask questions if you have any. So let's see if we run this macro. So our value is 2, and it's saying that it's less than 5. A value of 8 is between 5 and 10, and say I choose 10. Well, this might give us an issue because it's right on the cusp. Your value is greater than 10. I guess I need to. So also one more thing we can see right here, that we have some greater than signs, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. So this is the syntax for using some of these type of equation signs within VBA. So now if we run this again, your value is between 5 and 10. I guess that makes sense. So any questions about this?
So if you change that to in your between, if you say equal to 9 or something, then it's going to be equal to 10?
No, if I choose 9, it should be between 5 and 10.
Yes. So when you have a 10, should that be, I don't know, greater or equal to 10? I don't guess. Okay, well. No, because when you put a 10, they still say between, so that's why.
Yeah, I can make it say between 5 and 10 inclusive, yeah, so we know that the outsides are counting as within.
Right, so if you put 11, then of course it's going to be greater or equal to.
Yep. Okay, so this is really, this is a pretty basic example, but this syntax I use over and over and over again. Pretty much any macro that I build will have some form of if statement, usually with an else if. And one thing to note is that every if formula, or if statement, I guess, it will have only one if. It can have as many else ifs as you like, and it can only have one else. So we could we could make other conditions here, else if, and then I would write some true false condition here, and then it's going to give us an issue. But you can have as many else ifs, but the important thing to remember is that there's only one if and one else per if statement. Okay, so that's the basic of like the most basic form of it. Let's make it a little more interesting now, and we will create a calculator macro. And are you guys all able to follow along with me here? Am I going too quick for you guys?
No, I mean, this one is, well, basically, if you've done ifs within Excel, and I mean, obviously, it should make sense.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean the logic I would say is pretty straightforward
Yeah.
and similar to Excel. It's only remembering the syntax, which in this case
Exactly.
isn't
That's
that hard.
the issue.
Actually, I can just follow you, but I cannot really type in the same time because otherwise I will lose what you're saying. So I'm just watching you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean if you're more comfortable with it, feel free to watch and you can go back through and
Yeah,
demo
that's what I'm going to
later
do.
on.
Because I find out when you're talking, I'm typing the now.
All right. So now we're going to make probably our first useful macro, well, semi-useful because we already know how a calculator works and where to find one, but let's build a calculator for ourselves. So we'll make one that does addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication. This will be probably, I think we can do this in 15 lines of code, so it's not too complicated, and we'll let the user have the option to input two numbers, which will then be either added together, subtracted, divided, so the first one divided by the second one, or multiplied. So this will require a few input boxes for the user to select their operation and also enter the two numbers that they want to use. So let's first create some variables. We'll need only 3 variables for this. Number 1, like the first number they enter, the second number they enter, and the operation they choose. So we will first do num1 as, we can do this as a double so that they don't only have to type in integers, but they can enter decimal as well. Same thing for number 2. And for their operation, this will be whatever sign they enter, so plus, minus, division, or multiplication, and this will be a string. So first let's give the user a few input boxes. So we will have them select their operation. So this is going to be the first input box. It's just going to ask them to choose the operation that they want to do, and it's going to set whatever they select equal to the variable operation. And if we were to do this with a user form, we could have a drop-down menu with these 4 options, but in this case, let's see, when we run it, they have to just enter it as text, so you can say addition, and well, the macro is not going to do anything right now, but it'll set the operation variable to a plus sign. And then let's do similarly for number 1 and number 2. We can do another input box and some type of prompt here. All right, so again, this isn't actually doing anything yet, but if we run this through, they can select the operation that they want to do, choose the first number, and choose a second number, and nothing's going to happen. But that lets us set our variables to the three numbers, or two numbers and the operation. So now, any ideas how we're going to do this with if statements? Does anyone want to take a guess before I go building it out, like the general architecture for the if-else statements?
Well, if you're going to use ifs, you're going to have to go somehow select the operator. I mean the operation from the input box, and then from then, depending on that, then decide go down which one's going to use. But exactly how you're going to build it.
Yeah, no. I mean that's pretty much it. Where it's going to require an if statement, a few else ifs, because we have 4 operators here, and for each one of those we can choose a different operation with the VBA code. So yeah, pretty much spot on. So we'll just kind of begin if the operation equals, and we have to put these within quotes because it's a string. So if the operation equals a plus, then we want, and actually let me create one more variable for us, and we'll call this the result of the operation, and that can also be a double. So if the operation equals plus, then the result is num1 plus num2. And since these are all doubles, this should be fine, and it'll provide us with the answer in decimals. I think it's up to 8 or 16 decimal places, but it should work for us. So if the operation is a plus, then the result equals this, and then I can kind of breeze through the rest of these. So else if So then we'll do our subtraction. And then why don't I just copy this entire piece, because we'll have to repeat this a few times. So we'll say else if, then we can do multiplication. So if the operation's star, then we want to multiply the numbers. And lastly, if it's division, then we want to divide. So now we've covered our 4 operators, but we can do one more thing just to make it slightly cleaner, which is we will end with an else. And so if they haven't chosen a plus, minus, star, or a slash, then that means they haven't chosen a valid operator. So we can just give them a message box that says you have not chosen a valid operator. And we can end with an end if. And this is kind of sometimes if you forget an end if, it'll yell at you, but you have to make sure that every if statement has an end if to close it off. And then the last thing we need to do is we can just return the result of our operation in another message box. And we can make it have a little text. So the answer is, and then if you recall this from last time, you can use an and symbol, and then enter the variable you have. So here we have result, so the answer is, and then it'll do a space. It's important to leave that there, and then it'll give us the result of our calculation. So let's give this a try. So first we can try some addition. I'll choose some integers for the first time, but if you guys want to, you can try one with decimal places. So I'll do 8 and 3, and the answer is 11. And we can just try our other operations as well. So I can multiply 2.5 times 4, and the answer is 10. So we've just made a nice little calculator application. Nothing too fancy, but it's a good way to see really how you can use the ifs and else ifs and combine it with some message and input boxes. So it kind of synthesizes what we've learned over the past week or two. One more thing that I see that I need to do to clean up the calculator is so once it hits, if we do not select a valid operation, it's going to give us this message box, but then it's going to continue to run the macro. So let's see if I do it again, and the operation is an equal sign, which it's not going to recognize. Then it's going to still ask for our numbers, and it's going to say you do not have a valid operation, but then it's going to give us this other message box and try to provide us with a result, which we don't want to receive. So one more thing that we can do is if you enter the exit sub, what this is going to do is when the macro hits this line of code, it's going to exit the subroutine and stop the macro. So it's pretty much just going to jump from exit sub to the end, and that'll halt the macro. So now let's see if I try that again. I'll choose another invalid operation. It's going to say we do not have a valid operator, and it's over now. So that's another feature which is definitely useful to know. So any questions about this? Were you guys able to follow along?
Yes, you can. Okay, so what happened if I enter the wrong operator, then I realize that there's no way you can go back?
Mm-hmm.
Unless you have just rerun the macro.
Yeah, so typically for most macros that I do, you just, like, if you enter something invalid, I usually just exit the sub and tell them to, like, run it again with a change. I think, and let me try this because I don't usually. I know there are ways, and I'm not really a pro at this, but you can also use an error handler. So if I think it's something along these lines, so you can have it go to, and then an error handler, and then at some later point, I'm not sure the exact syntax for this.
Yeah, no.
But you can have it jump to another location, and maybe I'll do some investigation on that and bring it up next time.
No,
but yeah, it would be a nice feature if you could have it jump from that you do not have a valid operator back to the beginning and prompt them again for the operator. So maybe next time.
Yeah, that was something from BASIC that because you had to name the line, like you had to put a number or something. So you will go something like go to 10 or go to 20 or go to whatever number it was. So it probably Visual Basic has something like that as well. So
yeah, I'm sure there is, and I know you can use the go to and then select a location, but we can I'm not quite sure how to do that, so I'll look into it and maybe give it a try next time. But so any other questions about this macro from you guys?
You know, I think it's Annabelle, right? Is that what you're
Yes.
saying? Yeah. Okay. So because that reminds me, if sometime, when they prompt you something, you don't know what to enter. So I don't know if you can show example, like this is what you need to enter. Like, when we say region, like a prompt for region. So there's three choices: America, EMEA, or APJ. What happens if they prompt for something? What should I enter? That kind of things. It's like example. This is the prompt. Yeah, see, like right here. So you have this. So we all know there's a plus, minus, but if there's some different kind of prompt, then people probably say, what should I enter? Something like that.
Yeah, so I mean, for the input boxes, you unfortunately just have to enter text. Since it sounds like maybe you guys are interested in some other type of like a drop-down menu or a selection menu, maybe it's worth it for me to, at some point later on in the class, dedicate some time to user forms, because that's what will let you just select something from a list, which it sounds like might come in handy for some of the things you're thinking. It's definitely a more advanced topic, something that I'm not even 100% on myself, but we can look into that, and it gives you some nice features you can use and make it more interactive for the user. Okay, great. Yeah, so that's the if else if. I'm wondering if the next piece, which I was going to get into with the colleges, is going to be too simple, given that I think really everything from the calculator portion is going to be like more complicated than what I was planning on showing for the college names and the rankings. So do you guys want another if statement example, or I mean, we could always have some time for more questions if you have anything else from another week or something like that. All right. I mean, I guess we can do one more example with some if statements. And all right. Let's see. So I'll do one more macro, and this one, the purpose of it will be to determine if a given college, which we can select the row of, is either a top college or has a low tuition. And we can determine, let's say a top college for our purposes is going to be a ranking that's above 30, so like 1 to 30 on the ranking, and has a acceptance rate that's less than 20%. Or let's say the tuition is lower than 25,000. I'm just trying to scan the list and see what it looks like about close to what we would need for that. So let's we can quickly build out a macro which will come up with a message box and show us if the selected college meets our top college criteria, or if it's outside, and then it can also let us know if it's within like the low tuition bucket. So this is going to have a if statement. It's going to require an else if, and then it can also let us know if it doesn't meet either of our criteria. So it's not a top college and it's not in the low tuition bucket. So I'll just call this one. So let's begin with whatever row we're currently in. That's the value that we're gonna be curious about. So we're gonna need the ranking, acceptance rate, and tuition variables created, and we're gonna want to know those values for the active row. So let's first create our variables. And the ranking is an integer. The acceptance rate is a double, and the tuition, I think, is a long. So first we'll set these variables depending on where our cursor is at the moment. So we can say ranking equals active cell. Let me see if I remember this. I might need to refer to my notes on how to get the active cell. So it's the active cell row count, I believe. And let me, so this isn't the end of the formula yet, but I want to make sure that it's working so far. Maybe it might be rows. Maybe it's just active cell dot row. I don't think we're not counting the range. We just want to look at the current row. So that makes sense. Active cell dot row is going to be row 10, where we currently have selected. But then we're not actually interested just in the row. We want to know the value of the cell in that row. So we can do, again, back to, I think this was day 1 or 2 of the class, but we can take the cells with the row, the active row as the row index, and column 2, since we're looking at ranking, and we will look at the value within that cell. So now if I step through the macro, well, coincidentally, this one's in row 10 and is ranking 10, but we can see that we're now looking at the ranking number. Maybe I'll do it for another college just to show. So Brown University is 14, so it looks like we're okay there. Let me just repeat this a few times for the other variables that we want to create. So we can also do it for the acceptance rate, and all I need to change is the column number here. So now we're in column C, so I'll do it column number 3. And the tuition is the same thing, and in column 4. So now we've created our variables. If I step through this, it looks like everything is matching up to what we would expect. Any questions so far? This is kind of a repeat of what we did last time, I think. Nope. Okay.
No.
So now that we've created our variables and assigned them based on the active cell, we can now do some if formulas. And recall, these are going to be, we're looking at either a top college defined by the ranking and acceptance rate, or we're looking at the tuition being less than the certain target. So if the ranking, so first we'll begin with I'm just going to give a comment for this. So top college, if the ranking is less than 30, and acceptance rate is less than.
Less than or equal to 30?
Yeah, we'll look at the rankings that are less than or equal to 30.
Okay.
And the acceptance rate, which will be less than or equal to 0.2, which corresponds to 20% here. So if both of those criteria are met, then we will return something, and we can return a message box here. And I'll just call this criteria, let's say this is a top college. Let's say then it's not a top college. Then we might also be interested in the tuition falling low enough that it's maybe worth applying to. So we can say if it's outside of the top college, but the tuition is less than, I guess I said 25,000. If the tuition is less than 25,000, then I can say this is not a top college, but tuition is less than 25,000. So that'll be our second criteria. And then if neither of those criteria are met, then I can say otherwise. So for anything else, so we're just using our else here. We can say this is not a top college, and tuition is above 25,000. And we will end if. So is anyone noticing what group might not be accounted for, or what combination of these might not be accounted for given this if statement? So we have, if the ranking is less than 30 and the acceptance rate's less than 0.2 and the tuition is less than 25,000, it's still just going to say this is a top college, which is fine. Maybe we can leave it as that for now, but it's not going to have any, it's not going to recognize that it's a top college with also low tuition. So for this, I guess this makes it a little more complicated maybe than it needs to be, but I can add in one nested if. So let's say the first criteria is met. If the ranking is less than 30 and the acceptance rate's less than 0.2, then I can add in one more if statement within here, and I can say if tuition is less than 25,000, then this is a top college with tuition less than 25,000. So maybe that's like the sweet spot, the one you want to get, the one that's a top college with the low tuition. And then otherwise, if that criteria is not met, then we have our nested if else portion, which will just say otherwise it's just a top college. That extra criteria is not met, and I can do an end if there. So now if we actually run this macro, and I think this should work. So for Brown, it's not a top college and the tuition is above 25,000 because not all of the criteria was met for it to be a top college, and tuition, as you can see, is above 25,000. Let's try to find one that meets our criteria. So Columbia University, this is a top college, and let's say I'll change the tuition. So 20,000, then hopefully it tells us that this is a top college with tuition less than 25,000. So if we wanted to step through the macro, and this is something I'll do very regularly with if statements, so you can see where the logic is taking you. So we get the variables, and then when it comes to the first if, it's going to say, okay, that criteria was met, so now it's going to step into that if, and it's going to say, okay, it is meeting another if statement, the tuition's less than 25,000, so it'll step into that. That's where we get our message box, and then it's going to end that if statement and end the full if statement because its criteria has been met already on those, so it's not going to keep going through the else ifs or elses. So that's going to be, I guess, maybe a little bit more complicated given that we have this nested portion here. But really, I think if you can replicate what you've seen today with when it comes to real data, that's going to get you pretty far in terms of knowing if statements. I don't really ever get too much more complex than what we've seen. So just if you're pretty knowledgeable about this material, it's going to get you pretty far when it comes to if statements. So I know we're kind of running out of time here. Are there any other questions or comments for me?
No, when I look at the cell, active cell, that reminds me because when I did my if statement, I like to, I did like the column. I like a B2, you go B2 and C2 or something like that. So now, so I can change to that one. I can do the active cell dot row comma that is good. I learned something.
Yeah, and so the active cell row, this will be really nice next week when we begin getting into loops. So if you wanted to loop through a data set, instead of looking at the active cell row, we might have a variable like I, which would just be looped through. So we could loop it from I equals 2 through I equals 110. And that would loop through each row of this data table, and it could perform a different task on each of the rows, given whatever you have specified in the if. So that'll be next week, but it should be a good class, and I think loops are going to be really good for us.
Yeah.
Cool. So I guess we'll leave it at that. Any other questions or comments, guys?
Yeah, don't forget it and if.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got an error. Here's like, I'm forgetting something and if.
Yep. All right, great. Well, I will talk to you guys next week, and I will send out the video and these macros after the class as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Bye.
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 Bye bye.